Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Azure Centric Azure News Update Weekly podcast. And this week we having our normal team, me and Andrew Lowes, and we are talking about what is new from since the last weekly update. Before starting, we are receiving a great feedback, so thank you very much for that. Apparently, this new format of weekly it will help everyone to just listen to the news, what was released and what was updated in the Azure world from last week, from the last episodes. These episodes are being released on Mondays, every Monday, usually at morning time on mountain time. We are based in Calgary, so please just help us subscribe our channels and to just give a little bit more insight or what you like or what you want to explore. So hello, Andrew.
Hello, Marcos. Yes, and also from me as well. Thank you for the feedback. It's really helpful for us because it lets us kind of help integrate the direction that our listeners want to hear. So that's a good
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And yeah, so we've been doing this weekly, and I think this week there was some cool updates that came out
Yeah,
again.
there are some cool updates. It was a kind of a quiet week for on Azure World, let's say this way, but a very excited week as well as always. Azure and cloud doesn't stop surprising us, right? So let's jump on the first one, and the first one is by our friend, dear friend, Mark Rusunovic, the CTO of Azure, and he's talking about it's not an update or not a release, but he's talking about how the global network becomes more reliable regarding Azure through what's called the intelligent software. So this is a post or a blog post that is on Azure blog, and it talks about the impressive. If you read all of this blog, it's two parts. So he released the first part. We are hoping that next week we can conclude this topic, but it's massive. The network, what's called the dark fiber of Azure, it's pretty massive. We're starting to see all over the world already that. So we're talking about over 60 regions. That's insane. It's the biggest footprint that we have on any cloud provider in the world. We have more
Yep.
than 220 data centers, 170 edge sites, and this is probably we can spend a little bit more time explaining what are those numbers, and what is for me uh, blow my mind is we have more than 165,000 miles in fiber. So last time I did my math, it was coming to the moon and come back, right? Going to the moon and come back, something like that.
That's I'd say something like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a lot of fiber, my
Oh
friend.
my god.
Wow.
Are you kidding me?
And here I am in the city of Calgary, and I still have trouble getting fiber in my neighborhood, and Azure has it wrapped around the world. How many times?
I don't know. It's
I know,
insane,
but
but yeah,
220 data centers though, all fibered together in a
yeah,
mesh topology,
yeah,
right? And there's lots of redundancy. So Mr. Rusunovich was talking very candidly in this article, I thought, about how Azure is working to improve reliability. And I loved the word that he's kind of coined here, the de-risking of
yeah,
changes. Um, I thought that was really cool. So he talked about the Open Network Emulator, or ONE1, and then he talked about the real-time operation checker. And it's about emulating devices and networks, systems really, so that they can kind of test changes ahead, and they can also simulate that hardware and networks and software that are on the emulated pieces really of the Azure systems. And the net result is that and I can also speak to this over even the last maybe 2 to 3 years. We have seen less and less interruption due to changes. I remember getting alerts, at least 2 to 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Through the Azure app on my mobile. Hey, your network is impacted by something that's going on. And it's like, you're always shaking your fist at the sky. Those darn clouds, right? And,
Yeah.
old man shakes fist at clouds, I think is the phrase from the.
And this can, if you listen to our podcast and you are one of our subscribers, we already talk about that, because if you go back to the video that we talk about the Ignite, kind of the review of Ignite, we talk about this. They released on Ignite, that was September, so basically almost 2 months ago. They released a lot of updates regarding their zone reliability, the zone redundancy, the data center redundancy, the difference between a lot of regions, what is composed by region, what is composed by a zone, and all of that, that they are improving. And one of the things that they cite is, and probably going back, just if you follow us or if you are watching this through YouTube, that we have 170 edge sites and 220 plus data centers. So data center, it's if you read in this and you have the key design principles, it's one of the things that define data center or zone in this case to a region is the proximity. In this case, what we're talking about, it's not the proximity by the location, but by the latency between those data centers. So that's what defines region in Azure. So that's why we have 60 plus, and if you divide that, you get a little bit more than 3, almost 4 data centers per region. But that doesn't happen because we have regions that they have less, and we have regions that they have probably 1 data center they're starting with to just open that region, because it's that key design principle. I found very, very interesting the way that they do it. It just blows your mind how they're doing.
Yeah,
And
I like
those,
how they're keeping the regional traffic
yeah,
on their internal network, right? So they're keeping it on their internal fiber, internal, high speed, whatever they're using.
yes.
And I have to assume it's fiber, but I mean, really, it can be
I
any
don't think
technology.
it's coaxial cables or something like that, right?
I don't. Yeah, we're probably not dealing with a ring topology
No,
here.
no, no. And this is all of this fiber. It's Microsoft owned,
It
so
is. Yeah, and
it's
that's
not
really
the
important
public.
because
That's
they're
what's
also
impressed,
helping to
right?
control those costs, right? So they're keeping their costs, which keeps our costs as users of Azure lower. And we see less data egress charges when it's on the internal network, right?
Uh,
So
that's a very good
it's
point. I see
it's
these
an
on the.
advantage for us.
It is advantage, but I see these on a different level. I don't see related to costs. I see related to security. Because if
That
it's
as well,
this is
yes.
controlled by Microsoft, all the network, all of these plus then 165,000 miles of fiber means that it's basically their own network. We don't have
It is.
any wants to just flowing on that network or not. That's what
Yep.
I'm assuming that's what makes me feel a little bit more secure as well. But yeah,
Yeah, and it is, right? Because anytime our connection goes off of our provider, so in this case, Microsoft's backbone through a POP to an external ISP to then transit their network to somewhere else, you're right. we have an opportunity for bad actors to have physical access
Yeah.
or even remote access to another operator's equipment.
Yeah.
So Microsoft goes to extreme lengths for monitoring, and that's what we're talking a little bit about here. So they don't only monitor and emulate pushing changes out, but they're monitoring live configs. They're taking a look at all of these things. So any good NOC or Network Operations Center is going to be monitoring configurations for changes.
Yeah.
I can't speak to exactly what happens in an Azure NOC, but I have to make not a big assumption that they will also be monitoring network configs, equipment configs. It's pretty, standard stuff, right? So,
Of course.
The more we keep our data on that internal, that Microsoft managed network, whether it's regional or inter-region as well, as long as we can stay on the Microsoft fiber. Well, I'll use my phrase, we're cooking with gas, right? Because it's more secure, so it lends to all of these vertical offerings that we've talked about in episodes past. Healthcare, certainly not the least of those big advances that Microsoft has been pushing ahead. So the more steps that we take to secure data, the more steps that we take to monitor and make reliable networks and infrastructure, it's easier for large enterprises, for healthcare enterprises to adopt, right?
Yeah.
So I know I feel comfortable with my data in the Azure network and transiting. Quite often in demos that we build, you and I will do cross-region things. Actually, I just released an Azure article this week about Azure Resource Mover, and that demo we built live to do, I think it was West Europe to East US. And it's really cool how you can stay on the Azure network. And before I get too far off track with that one, I'm going to head myself off at the pass for that one, Marcos.
That's okay.
So
That's
yes.
Okay. But one of the things
Yeah.
that you can see on the screen is the way that they are testing this, because testing network, like you mentioned, the one, it's not easy, and the way that they are doing all of these changes, because it's cloud, and the cadence of that they are doing all of these changes and all of these improvements, enhancements of the features and everything else, they don't have time to just basically, it's not time, it's they have to be very agile, because as far as we know, every 10 days they are releasing something or something like that, they are releasing something new. And this proves that the developer, or in this case a network engineer, and they can test before it goes to the production, and they can see through this emulation what's going to be, and that's the involving of the cloud, right? And again, the zero touch operations that they are doing, the capacity planning, and all of that. So it's pretty the insight that our good friend and CTO of Azure, Mark Rusunovic, give us this insight for us to explore, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and certainly he also speaks to the feedback loop from not just live incidents, but also testing incidents as they go through the emulation, right? So they're using not only feedback from the human network engineers, but they're using AI feedback on what happened, why did that test fail, comes back, and it just helps build the AI stronger and stronger, so that the automation can really take off very successfully, right?
Yeah.
So they can continue to build AI so that they can have less downtime and understand changes and planned and unplanned outages when things happen, right? So it keeps the AI. I don't like the word, but agile as well.
Yeah. So moving on, and moving now to the second news. This is a release, a GA, that the new enhanced DNS features in Azure Firewall, and this on this GA was one of the reasons that before all of this I was explaining my excitement to Andrew that I'm moving my blog post and not blog post, my blog and the company into Azure. Not into Azure, it's already on Azure, but moving the DNS, all of that into Azure. So now my name service will become on Azure, and then I have all of that goodness. Because of this was one of the reasons. It was a few days back that they announced the GA. I was working with that on the preview, and it's pretty awesome. So now we can customize DNS support. That is GA. So now we can have our name servers and all of that. We can have Azure Private DNS. So instead of building building DNS internally for websites through normal DNS and everything else, we can now use the Azure one. And again, this is only private. And the way that DNS proxy now works, I just saw a tweet today from my good friend Sammy Lau that they are replicating a DNS attack from 2008 now. Again, a DNS bomb or a DNS. I don't remember what was the attack, but they were replicating right now, and apparently it's becoming available for all of this. And by my God, when I read that tweet, and I start to see his post about that, so yeah, it makes me even more comfortable, because now with this DNS, it ties directly on Azure Firewall. Pretty awesome.
Yeah, so Azure Firewall before was restricted to only using Azure DNS, right? So now the generally available feature is now you can not only utilize all of these features for your own DNS, bringing your DNS service, basically DNS forwarding really, into Azure, but you can now link either single or multiple servers and configure Azure Firewall to use your DNS, not just Azure DNS. So for you and I, we want to bring our services into Azure. It allows us more flexibility, building things, exploring and learning, and that's important for anybody to do as well, of course.
Yeah.
But companies typically don't want that in their production environment. So.
Yeah, and usually enterprise or companies or enterprise organizations, they have their own internally. They have what's called a split DNS, right?
Yeah.
So they have this internal DNS that basically is attached to AD because they need to do that. Is attached to AD, is attached to everything, and then they have this split DNS that is what we usually call the external DNS, right? That always it's from when you're coming from outside to some of those applications that you need to do it, and usually you can divide both. With a lot of organizations moving to the cloud and moving to Azure, in this case, it becomes way more sensitive. This was, I think it was a little bit delayed. We should have this before. It will help us in a lot of our projects, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an understatement.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think the one thing actually I do remember. You're killing me. The one thing I remember reading in this article was that when you configure Azure Firewall now, there's a couple of kind of catches, right? So you have to be a little bit aware, as always, of the requirements for configuration. So in this case, we can use Azure Private DNS for our Azure Firewall DNS.
Yes.
But it has to be on the same virtual network. So it has to be where everything lives together, and it has to be linked to your Azure private zone.
Yes.
So not a big deal. Lots of Azure this, Azure that words in that sentence, but it's just about making people aware. We have some requirements around doing that, but it's easy to configure, and it's chances are, if you're using private DNS, you already have those other things in play.
Yeah.
So it's just about making sure you check your configuration, linking them together, test it in your DevOps or your testing tenant, then put in your change request, do your testing like we talked about in the previous article, right? So do your due diligence, do the testing, run your simulations, make sure everything works, then take a look at your change process and pushing it out into production.
Yeah.
But really, yeah. So, Azure Firewall, more flexibility, yet again, extending that. And we were hoping for this, I think, last year this time. We had our fingers and maybe our toes crossed. But now it's there, makes life a bit easier. So, that's a really cool thing.
It is. And it's not only that, right? It's, like you said, is an understatement. This is always evolving, and this is where we need to improve. Not only us, Azure is improving a lot, and they are listening to our not complaints, let's call it suggestions, right?
Community suggestions.
Community suggestions. Right. I love that. That's a very good one. And again, it sounds really difficult, but if you have any problems doing that, just drop us a message. By email, you have all of the social media of Azure Centric. I'm sure that you can find the well-known Andrew Lowes on the interweb, and me myself. So
I'm actually on WebUnet instead of interwebs, but that's okay.
Okay, that's okay. Let's move on then. This is not a new or a news or update, but it's more like we like to promote other stuff as well, and that was on a blog, and I think it's really important. So on November 18, there's going to be a Open Azure Day. So we're going to talk about Linux, OSS, and everything. It's basically Azure. It's more like it's a compute, if I'm not mistaken, from what I read on the article. It's more on the compute side of Azure. So I already registered. I will attend, because it's always good to have all of these events. So if you are, again, this is not an update on Azure. It's more like where you can get more information, and probably next week we're going to talk about this.
Yeah, so this is one of those cool ones, right? So this is an opportunity for us, especially now, I think of, to come closer together, right? So it's about the bigger, broader Azure community. And that includes open source operating systems and tools.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I thought was cool, and I'm kind of just stealing the points right out of the article, so please, again, go to Azure blog and read it. But we just wanted to talk about this because it allows, they have special kind of sessions set up, right? Different learning opportunities, I want to maybe call them. But they want to talk about running secure, seamless Linux and container apps using tools that open source developers already know. So you don't have to come in and start learning Windows-based tools or other stuff. You can use tool sets you already know and take advantage of Azure services. So they want to show us as a community how to take advantage of that in Azure. Yeah. And there's also learning about Kubernetes, and cloud native ecosystem. Kubernetes has really taken off in the last few years. It's been around for a long time, I'll acknowledge that, but it's very popular. And certainly, even today yourself talking about CI/CD pipelines, continuous improvement and continuous deployment pipelines, you want to take advantage of some of these new technologies that we can kind of normalize. So one of the things I think you and I do well is explaining techie stuff to normal people. And that's something that we really, as an industry, have to do. But anyways, before I do my ADD path there today, Open Azure Day. So they're also going to talk about building unique hybrid and multi-cloud solutions that meet different organizations' needs. And I thought that was really important.
It is.
So,
And it's a good
gone.
event to attend, and it's on the 18th, November 18th. I don't know when you just listen to this podcast, but if you listen before that, November 18th, 2020, just go there and register. It's a free event, and we highly recommend to do it. I will attend because I'm sure that we will learn tons on that one.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good opportunity to connect with some experts.
Of course. Moving on to the next one. This is not an Azure update, but it's dear to our hearts, right? We could not miss this.
Absolutely.
Microsoft just announced PowerShell 7.1. It's, if I'm not mistaken, and we were talking this before this video or this podcast, right? That they have just a few changes, right?
One or two. Yeah. So I actually had to go to the Microsoft Docs release notes for 7.1, and I copied and pasted into Excel 107 updates and fixes to commandlets. And that's plus the other additions and other changes, right? So just to
107?
Yeah, only 107. I mean, yeah. Well, to be honest, I thought it was going to be around 45 or so because that's kind of normal. So I started just counting the bullet points, and I got to 55, and I thought, you know what? I'm not about halfway through the scroll bar on here. I think I'm just going to let Excel count for me. 107. 107. I was really blown away. A lot of big improvements in there. And I was taking a look. I did a little search on Twitter, Posh 7.1, and a lot of very positive feedback. Everybody's really excited about this.
Yeah.
And when I looked at just kind of thinking back to our last article about Open Azure Day, I was really surprised at how many platforms are supported with PowerShell 7.1.
Yeah.
I'm going to indulge myself and take like a minute to tell you what is supported, Marcos, because I think you'll be as impressed as I was.
I already update my Mac OS, and it's pretty good. I have to say, be able to use PowerShell natively on Mac OS is pretty good. I don't have to open a VM to open a Windows and start using. No. I was doing that, and it's pretty good. You can do everything.
So I'm a Windows user. I've been Windows for a very long time, and I am totally stuck in my desktop ways. Eventually, you'll probably sway me, and I'll have to try Mac OS at some point. But for now, I'm still Windows 10. But Windows 8.1, 10, and of course Windows Server 2012 R2 and higher supported. Now, the non-Windows support is the big bulk of this kind of update. So I was a little impressed with this. Not a little. I was a lot impressed with this, to be honest. So Mac OS, very big, but also Ubuntu, Debian, CentOS, Red Hat, Enterprise Linux, Fedora, and Alpine. Not to mention community support for Arch Linux, Raspbian Linux, and Kali Linux as well. Holy cow. So Windows, it was also in there, but look at all the open source. And this is native support, folks. So this isn't just like open a VM, get Windows running in Wine or whatever. This is a native support at prompt. So within the OS, in the kernel. Yeah. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal. So I'm so thrilled with it because now PowerShell is really, I had these visions. I was so lucky, as you know, one of the highlights of my kind of evolution in IT was to be able to in person chat with Jeffrey Snover in Texas a few years ago, and it was very impactful for me. So he talked about how his vision was that it was. Sorry about that. that PowerShell was starting to manage storage nodes, starting to talk to different network devices, interact with switches and routers. And now we've reached that vision. It was really impactful, and it's just so cool to see. So now we've got all this different OS support across all of the things. We're seeing it, not the, one of the exciting ones for me is Raspbian Linux and Kali Linux. So, we
Why
can update
those?
our.
Why those? For me, the most important one is my Mac. I don't want to
It
be
is. So,
rude and to be disrespectful of the other ones, but it's what I use. It's what I use daily, and I decide to go with Mac because of that, to push me a little bit out of my comfort zone of being
mhm.
18 or 20 plus years of using Windows, starting to use a little bit more other platforms, because again, Microsoft did evolve a lot of times. If I
Yeah.
knew
So
myself right now and looking at all of the things that I did 10 years ago, if they told me, oh, in the future you're going to use a Mac, I would say, you must be out of your mind. Why I'm going to leave Windows? I'm not saying that
you're
Windows
right.
10 is bad. It's not at all, because I have other devices that Windows 10,
Oh, you
and
do. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, but
Yeah.
it
So
felt
for
more.
me, Windows 10 is where I work. That's at my kind of my home office desk. And I use Surface devices, so my go-to is Windows 10. Um, For me, I'm not a Mac OS user, but I do like to get into trouble with a few different things. So,
Yeah,
Kali Linux, certainly for testing, penetration testing, doing some fun stuff. That's a very big tool, and it's very impactful for PowerShell working within that platform, the Kali platform, because then we can use automation with it, right? So we can script things, and once we can script it, it's on command line, and now we can automate. We can just
yeah,
do stuff.
yeah,
Really important for that. Also, remote access is easy through that kind of a venue.
yeah,
Now, the Raspbian Linux for me, that one is just fun. So for me, that's where I kind of get out of my comfort zone with Raspbian a bit. And my garage door runs on Raspberry. So, and I have a few other things I want to get into. As you know, I have a bit of a passion project, my camper,
yeah.
and it has some interesting, cool features in there. Um, so next spring coming up, I'm thinking about doing a little bit of automation with it, and maybe Raspbian might be my go-to for that. It just may
Yeah.
be.
We have
So
to make
uh,
automation for our Nespresso machine. Wake up, bang, Nespresso
So
day.
I did make an attempt on that during our lockdown. I was semi-successful, but yeah, I have a bit of work to do with that. I think we can figure a way out here.
I
So,
was just kidding, Andrew.
oh, I would never kid about Nespresso or good coffees in general. With this, definitely caffeine powered, as you know.
Yeah, yeah. So moving on, and this probably for our subscribers and our listeners, it sounds like redundant that we already talk about this, but they release again, and just to see how is that important, the how to optimize the Azure workload costs. I think it was 2 weeks ago, something like that. Two
Yeah.
episodes ago that we talk about that again. But in this case, they kind of frame it again well, and they show again. It's not a release. It's more like how you can leverage those costs attached to
Yeah.
one of the things that we always talk about. That is the well architecture framework, the Azure well architecture framework.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think this update was more about, as you said, framing cost management and looking at Azure workload
Yeah,
costs, but in the context of applying the well-architected framework, the
yeah,
Azure well-architected framework. I should
yeah,
be specific. So Omar Khan wrote this article, GM of Microsoft Azure. But this is a really kind of an interesting view on it, right? So it gives, I think, organizations a good way to apply the framework over top of it. So, we talk about the pillars within the framework,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also sections within each pillar, right?
Yeah.
So, within cost management, there's a couple of different kind of points to that are discussed rather in this article, and it's a good way for businesses to kind of apply it. So I know between Azure Centric and you, I talk about cost management an awful lot. I talk about budgets, Azure budgets, and things like that. And this is a good way to kind of help analyze cloud spend. So this update really emphasizes the integration of the well-architected framework pillars.
Yeah.
And it makes it easier to understand for kind of normal people, because one of the problems we have in Azure in general, but IT, specifically IT, is translating a technical cost. So when we see things like you and I have gone over a couple Azure invoices in our day, and it's not really English. I'm not sure what it is, but it's not English. So you see storage cost, you see data egress, you see different tiers of storage if you're using hot and cold and all these archives and things. So it can get pretty complex. So how do you add it all together and determine, where is my waste? Where is a category that we allocated, say $5,000 to category 3, but we're at $7,000. So we're over in one category. So, budget management is a critical piece for business. We have to make sure that we're compliant with
Yeah.
our budgets. Otherwise, it's going to be tough to pay those
And
bills,
it's
right?
not only that. It's sometimes these drivers, what we always talk about when we talk about these Azure architecture framework, that basically it's about governance. It is what we based when we talk about governance in Azure, or when we go into specific topics like Azure governance.
Hmm.
It's the policy. It's like sometimes all of this cost. It's just, and if you read the article, you will see that we're starting to have words that we didn't think about it, and a lot of people say, but why Microsoft is so keen on this cost optimization? Because they want you to have a good experience, right? First of all,
Absolutely.
and then it's like there is a lot of waste. And if last time I was talking to a friend of mine, and all over this pandemic time that we are facing, um, we saw a lot of increase on the cloud adoption, right? A lot of organizations, they were delaying the cloud enablement and the cloud on their organizations, and they force it some kind of way during this pandemic. And I read a lot of times that, for example, training, and we we know that because we are an MCTs, so Microsoft Certified Trainers, and we saw that a lot of our training that we try to do it even online were not available because they were reducing not the footprint, but they were reducing the capability or the capacity of Azure because they are turning more VMs on, and that is one of the things. And another thing that we're starting to hear a lot is about this cloud waste. So the mentality on the mindset that we have from going from on-prem to the cloud, it's different. It's again, it's a pay as you go. So why do we have to over provisioning VMs or everything? Because this is another mindset, is a pay as you go. Yes, you can configure all of the elasticity that the clouds provide you, but
Hmm.
it's all related to not only costs but the user um, the usage of each organization regarding cloud. And this is not only Azure that is talking about that. I think in a few days, re-event, the AWS biggest event, will come, and they are already starting about saying about that, because
Yeah.
it's not that they don't want to spend their dollars on their clouds. It's not that. It's about the organizations to be able to be more productive, and by being more productive, you don't need to overspend by overcommit your workload.
Right. So, but this comes back to the well-architected framework,
Exactly.
right? Because maybe we'll talk specifically about those stages, right? So within cost optimization pillar is the four stages: design, provision, monitor, and optimize.
Yeah.
So really, we're saying from design, right at the start, you want to think about cost optimization. How do you do that? You do it over time through governance, right?
Yeah. Yeah, of course,
And
policies and everything else that you need to implement. Something like, we never thought about this, but I remember being on at that time was TechEd, and one of the partners be able to shut down part or partial of data center doing non-business hours, especially on long weekends, for example, or especially during the weekend. And by doing that, you're saving a lot of money, because it's energy that you are doing. It's not only the energy directly on the servers, but it's also the air conditioning energy that you are not having to power that much, because now
exactly,
you have less servers. It means less heat that you need to dissipate,
exactly.
right? So,
Yeah, there's a lot of
yeah,
advantages to optimizing the hours of availability, for example, of the data center.
yeah,
You can maybe, what's the word I want to use? You can turn down a lot of your workloads that are non-critical.
yeah,
So if you just need your company website and a contact form open on the weekends and overnight, for example, then you can shut down non-essential systems during that
completely.
time. So it's something that you can explore, as a business or as a department even. Any cost savings is good
It is.
because it impacts, like you said, it's important. It impacts our environment as well, and it helps us to be responsible citizens, of the world. You and I, we both have a great love of the outdoors, and it's something that we have to work to protect in all the things we do, right? So
Yeah,
you pick up litter when you see it, but you shut off a light when you're not in the room. You also shut down the server if nobody's going to be using it for days and days.
yeah,
So it's a scary thing because we've been conditioned in IT to think of that 99.99 plus percent availability, but that's still valid as long as those hours are defined by the business.
yeah,
Then we can still adhere to that
yeah.
uptime.
And
So it's
I agree. It's like it's. I think, yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. It's more on educational part of it that this becomes. That's why it's important. That's why we're coming again in all of these Azure news on Azure Centric podcasts. That we're coming again with this topic, and Microsoft again on a space of 2 or 3 weeks. They come again with this topic again to just reinforce that part, how you can optimize, because this at the end what allow that the company will have a bigger budget to do other things as well.
exactly, yeah, and that's
At the end is going to be that, right? So if you're thinking
right,
on
and
that,
they do speak about that in the
yeah,
article as well, right? So it's important to have that governance wrapped around all of these pillars, right? Because for cost optimization, we want it can help save money, but it's also part of adherence and compliance to green initiatives as well, being responsible in all aspects, not just the green of money. But right now, with the whole pandemic going on, it's really important. I think of it as but we in IT have really spent a lot of money rapidly changing, rapidly moving. And those dollars have come from either future budgets or reserve budgets.
Yeah.
And we do need to be aware of that. And we have to understand that this gives us an opportunity, just monitoring, optimizing costs, getting rid of any waste that's not used, like, oh, heck, that testing server's been on for, 3 weeks after we finished something. And that happens all the time. It's easy, but monitoring through governance can really help control those costs. Completely. And during these complex times, we can help save that money for that company by doing that. And that's important. It's good to contribute, right?
It is. My good friend, it's been an awesome conversation during these updates. I think we are at the end of our podcast. It's been a normal one, a lot of good content coming. Once again, thank you, Andrew, for being part of the Azure Centric Podcasts once more. And please help us to grow. Subscribe the channel. Give us feedback. If you want some topics, extra topics that we can do, I think that we can always arrange a time in our busy schedules to just talk about that. So once again, Andrew, thank you very much for coming. And see you next week in this case.
Thank you so much for having me, Marcos.